How's it going, Young Adults family? I hope that you're well. For those of you who I got to see at church yesterday on kind of re-entry Sunday, it was so good to see you. If that's something that you'd like to participate in, check Hillside's website as the registration for that weekly gathering time opens up every Monday. That aside, hi, how are you? I miss you. A little surreal, if I'm honest, to think the fact that we're still doing our gatherings this way, but hopefully that changes soon. Listen, this week we have a speaker. He's a longtime friend of mine. His name is Chris Hilkin, and he is the young adults pastor down at North Coast Church down there in San Diego. Fantastic church. The ministry that he gets to oversee has been huge in influencing the way that we've programmed and structured the young adults family. Their stuff is called the Jordan Ministry. Check them out if you want more awesome content to follow along with. But this week, Pastor Chris is teaching. Check it out. And I will see you guys soon, hopefully very soon. Check back here for more info on that stuff. But otherwise, have a great week and enjoy this message from Chris Hilkin.
If you have your Bibles, we're going to make our home in John chapter 2 today. As you're turning there, Corey, Fenn, and I go back to a meeting time in the Dominican Republic years and years back. And I've had this just powerful man crush on him for like the past 10 years since we've been able to do that. So there's just not a lot of guys I respect higher and look up to more. So I really do feel honored to get to come and to share this with you. John chapter 2. We're going to look at Jesus' first miracle that's recorded in the book of John. And here's what it says. On the third day, which for Christians, most of us, when you talk about the third day, you shouldn't just be thinking of a late 90s, early 2000s Christian band. God of wonders. That's not important right now. But you should also be thinking of, the third day. We know in Christianity, the third day means a lot to us. Which actually, when you take the whole Gospel of John up to this point, this is actually on day 7. So it's the first day, then it says on the next day, on the next day, on the next day, and then on the third day. So it's day 7, which again, for a Jewish audience, they're going to think of that differently. Okay, if you're talking about day 7, in Jewish thought, you're thinking of a creation narrative, or maybe a recreation narrative. John loves these themes throughout his gospel where he sets up here's what it looks like on the surface, but here's this deeper meaning to it as well. And that's, if we're not careful, we read John as this kind of neat narrative of like stories of Jesus, and we don't go under the surface to what does this really represent for us. The application is almost always found in the deeper understanding John wants us to take about who Jesus is. That's where I want to take us today. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Okay, so this is an ancient wedding, and if you've done any study of the ancient weddings, what you'd essentially do is your wedding was almost a direct representation of God and his people, right? All throughout the Old Testament, there were these different phrases, and they would start with the phrase, "When Messiah comes, he will." When God shows up in the flesh, dating all the way back to Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7, it's one of our favorite Christmas verses. Unto us a son is born, unto us a child is given, the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He's going to bring inclusion to many different people groups, not just the Jews. The prophecies continue to say that he's going to be beaten, ridiculed, he's going to be crucified, and ultimately come back to life. But when you're under oppression like they were under oppression, when you were hated like they were hated, when you were ostracized like the Jews were ostracized, the way that you bring yourself comfort in these thousands of years, whether it be slavery or exile or brokenness, pretty much this whole Old Testament is the story of God's people rebelling against him, and then it doesn't go super well. And you've experienced that in your life. I've experienced that in my life. Now, sometimes my suffering is going to be a result of just dumb things that I've done, and sometimes it's just a dumb result of what someone else has done. And sometimes I suffer for the sake of the gospel. Sometimes I suffer for the sake of my own stupidity. Sometimes it's because my parents made bad decisions. Sometimes it's because someone's angry and hurt people. There's a lot of reasons why we would suffer, but just imagine a people group that were so kind of systematically enslaved or broken or hurt. And even today when we experience or we hear about these people groups who undergo this kind of suffering, what's cool is when you kind of jump back into their histories, they tell powerful tales, and they have music is more important to them, and art and literature and understanding and the way that they talk to each other. There's this deep kind of coagulated, or in the crucible of pain, so often we cling to hope more so than anything else. We cling to what is to come. We cling to what was promised in the future because our current situation is kind of garbage. Now, if your life's going great, if you're making great money and you got great friends, you got a great boyfriend or great girlfriend, or you're married or whatever it is, and you feel like everything life has to offer, you just you eat it all, you got everything at your fingertips, then you're probably less familiar with this idea of hope, or for what is to come, and when this happens, we'll experience, because you're right here and you're right now is sweet. You're all about it. It's great. And now I want us to jump back into that Jewish cultural context that for 400 years hasn't heard anything from God. They walked with him in the Old Testament. They've told stories. And now Jewish mothers and fathers can't do anything except run their fingers through their children's hair at night and just start telling stories about when Messiah comes. When Messiah comes. When God comes to save us. When Messiah gets here, he will. When Messiah finally shows up, he's going to. And then John chapter 1 begins with, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it moves on to say, now it's time for Messiah to come. God becomes flesh. And for thousands of years, as this Jewish community lies in wait for this coming Messiah, we finally see the Messiah burst out of 30 years of learning and understanding and growing and working and pushing and experiencing suffering and pain to begin his ministry. And his first miracle takes place at this wedding, which in the Old Testament we see in the book of Isaiah and the book of Psalms that when Messiah comes, it'll be like a wedding. This is very common language in the Old Testament. When Messiah comes, it'll be like a great wedding. Now, we might think, when you think of Jewish culture, the most powerful party of the year was probably Passover, right? Or maybe the most powerful feast of the year was the Feast of Tabernacles, or whatever it might be. But when you kind of read and you go back and you study it, there was nothing that was more festive than a wedding. And so it makes sense that for this culture, because the coming of Messiah was so closely alluded to as being this wedding, or this great analogy was given to the Jews of when Messiah comes, it'll be like a wedding, that Jews took weddings very seriously. Because if this is a word picture of God loving us and God coming for us and God being there with us and God knowing us and God interacting with us and us conversing with him, and if you were going to say, well, then I'm going to get married, then Jewish culture said, well, then you better accurately represent what it's going to be like when Messiah comes. So much so that when you got married in this day and age, you would go under this big thing called a huppah, almost this big sheet, and it was supposed to represent God's presence. Stakes were high at weddings, and we wouldn't really even understand how high they were. I got married in Bakersfield, California. Maybe you've heard of it, land of the free, home of the brave. You've probably passed through it at some point and stopped at the In-N-Out there on the 58. But when I got married there, we had 450 guests at our wedding, which was astronomical number of people. But we had an open bar, and everyone was dancing and getting their groove on and whatever it is. And obviously some people take advantage of that, maybe to an extent, maybe too far. No one really knows. But at the end of the night, we'd served a couple different drafts of beer, different kinds of beer, and everyone's favorite IPA ran out. And I remember this because the night of, in the middle of all the dancing, my father-in-law came up to me and he was like, "We're out of beer." And he just said it. He said it so stoically, and he was already a few beers deep, so it was just a funny moment. It was part of the festivities, and he probably wouldn't remember saying that for a number of reasons. But everyone else who was there, if you ask probably anyone who went to my wedding, "Hey, tell me about that night," I would bet you $100 that no one, except for if you're watching this and now you know, would go, "Oh yeah, they ran out of beer. They ran out of this, my favorite kind of beer." Because even if you went to a wedding and that happened, it would just be this blip. Wouldn't really care too much about it. You'd have other ways of experiencing the night and everything. But in Jewish culture, this was such an egregious offense. Because, as the book of Joel says, when Messiah comes, it'll be like this wedding. And when Messiah comes, the hills will flood with wine, with this new wine. The rivers will be flowing with it. This living water, this powerful wine. There's all this imagery of when Messiah comes, there's going to be, the old systems will be done away with, and the new systems will experience not just replacement, but an abundance. Like it says, when Messiah comes, he's not just going to take our old tabernacle system and give it a little facelift, a little upgrade. God will be with us. He's going to take the things we had that we thought were good, and then when he transforms them, he's going to give us those things in abundance. It's going to be bigger than we could ever imagine. So, if a wedding represents God and us, this communion, this fellowship, Messiah coming, then you don't have a lot of room to mess up a wedding. From who you invite to who you serve to what you serve to. That's why in the middle of this, it says this, Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. Perhaps this was even what took it over the edge. Maybe that's why there was too many people at this wedding. And it says this, verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. I want you to see the juxtaposition of these phrases about wine. The first thing we hear about wine is there's no more wine. It's gone. It's empty. Everything's desolate. It's broken. It's empty. It's lonely. There's a gap. It's a vacuous mass. Where is the wine? There's an absence. This is a beautiful picture of our position with God without Jesus. We're gone. We're destitute. We're desolate. And you got to take it one step further, because you got to get in the cultural context. When you ran out of wine at a wedding back then, it was such an egregious offense, you could quite literally, we know this from the early text, you could be sued for it. Now, when we ran out of alcohol at my wedding, I didn't think for 1 second, someone's going to get their lawyers involved. Because in a religious system, I have misrepresented God, who is supposed to be a God of abundance, and I have not bought enough. And so when we find this out, you might think to yourself, well, if they knew this was so important in their context, why would you ever allow yourself to run out of wine? Well, let me ask you the question. What would be the best reason why a family might run out of wine? Why would they not have bought enough wine? Well, they couldn't afford it. If you knew the stakes that were here and you weren't able to provide enough wine, I think implicitly you would just jump to, so Jesus is he's at the wedding of a poor family. And some people even believe, as tradition has it, that Jesus was a relative of this. It might have been like Mary's niece or Mary's aunt's wedding, whatever. We don't really know what it is, but tradition has it that they were actually related. And when you ran out of wine, it brought dishonor. No, it brought shame to your whole family. It brought shame to everyone. For weeks and months and years, you would walk on the street and people would go, those are the cheapskates that misrepresented God at that wedding. They ran out of wine. How could you do that? What were you thinking? So we see Jesus show up with his disciples, who maybe they were the one who put the guest list over. And this family's running out of wine. And you can't just go, bummer, not enough wine. That seems like kind of a pithy miracle, right? Without the context, it goes like, who cares? Couldn't Jesus just have gone, look, I got to drive out the demon-possessed. I got to heal the sick and the infirm. I got to bring a guy back from the dead named Lazarus. I don't have time to change water into wine. But when you see this, you go, there's something deeper going on here. When Messiah comes, Zephaniah says, when Messiah comes, he will take our shame and replace it with honor. So Jesus shows up to this family who's on the brink of immediate, personal, long-lasting shame. And Mary's mother, maybe with tears in her eyes, goes, they did it. They ran out of wine. It's gone. This is a reflection on them. They can't afford it. They're poor. Is this time to start your ministry? Is this the moment? They have no more wine. Jesus replies with, woman, which was a very kind, endearing term back then. Today, I wouldn't recommend calling your mother woman this boldly. It has shifted over the years, but woman, why do you involve me? It translated, Jesus is literally saying, help me understand why you're talking to me right now. This is none of my business. Jesus replied, My hour has not yet come. John's going to take this theme of the hour of his glory, or his glory itself, and ultimately we're only going to find out what his hour is, and that's going to be the hour of his cross, where he says, the time has come, my time for glory has arrived, when he's going to allow himself to be persecuted, prosecuted, judged, beaten, stripped naked, and hung on a tree, paying the price for you and I, that you and I, who were once distant, could become into fellowship with him because of his death, burial, and resurrection, that our sins were taken away, and then we were promised new life through his resurrection life. That's the hour of his coming. And we then, our response to that is just to submit and surrender our life to him. And in that, the gospel message of newness applies. His mother, perhaps knowing this was going to start his walk to the cross, as soon as Jesus goes public with his power, and as soon as he goes public with his miracles, you just put a chain of events in action that are eventually going to lead to his death. And if she recognizes her own son as Messiah, then she's familiar with Isaiah 53. He is going to be stricken, smitten, and afflicted as one who people would hide their faces. Psalm 22, he's going to have his hands and feet pierced. He's going to be surrounded by dogs. They're going to cast lots for his garments. So Mary, knowing these things, is well aware of what his hour is probably going to look like. She says, do whatever he tells you. Nearby stood six stone water jars. So 6 obviously is if 7 is this idea of perfect completion, creation, then 6 is the same reason we apply the number of Satan is 666. It's the idea of incompletion. It was broken. There was something missing from it. And stone, back then, if you these would be ceremonial washing jars, it's going to say here in a second. The kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. So we have about 180 gallons of water here that was used for ritual purification, which when Jesus came, he said, your old ritualistic cleansing system is going to be fulfilled in me. You see, you used to have to clean yourself in order to approach me, but now living inside of you, I've made you clean that you can, Matthew 28, go and take my word to the ends of the earth. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Again, stone, they thought in the idea here was if you put ceremonial water in pottery or you were washed in it, then pottery like collects dirt. It can stick to it. Or if you put it in some kind of a something that can collect dirt or can collect the filth. That's why stone was used, because it didn't stick to stuff. When you put water in a stone jar, you don't really get this film that you would like in a piece of pottery or in some kind of canvas like that. So they would use stone as a way of symbolizing this is the old way of doing things. This is the ritualistic cleansing aspect of it. So we know what these jars were used for. And there's great symbolism here. There's 6 of them. It's incomplete. The system of ritual purification is not a complete one. It was just a placeholder until when Messiah gets here. Jesus said to the servants, fill the jars with water. So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. They did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, everyone brings out the choice wine first. So the master of the banquet, right? We probably don't have these in too many of our modern day weddings. But here's the guy who kind of kept everything going, kind of like the DJ, but he oversaw the whole thing. So picture of like your DJ and your MC and your wedding coordinator, all wrapped into one person. Their job was to make sure that everything ran smooth and that everyone was having a great time. So they would introduce the new courses and they would call for a next round of wine. And so I wonder if he even started getting mutterings of, I think they're out of wine. And then this new cup gets brought in and he drinks from it. And the guy goes, what in the world is this? He brought the bridegroom aside and he said, look, I got to tell you something. Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after everyone has had too much to drink. But you saved the best till now. He's going, look, just help me understand. You served great wine at the beginning of this thing. It wasn't the best. Like you're a pretty poor family, but it was good for being poor wine. It was pretty good, right? And now you just served me wine that I've never tasted its equal. That's the best wine I've ever had. Where did this wine come from? I just wonder if Jesus is sitting in the corner just sipping, going, I don't know, right? But how much wine do they get? Here's this idea once again of when Messiah comes, he will take the old system, he will fill it with himself, and in himself we'll find abundance. The Sabbath was meant for rest. Jesus comes and says, I am Lord of the Sabbath. I am the rest you're looking for. So he's able to proclaim to everyone, come to me, all who are weak and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. The Old Testament, you had the temple. Jesus shows up as Messiah, and he says, this temple is going to fall down. You destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. And now, through the Holy Spirit, the temple is able to live inside of us. He takes all these Jewish institutions, and he says, this was a placeholder. I am what it was pointing to. And in me, John 10, is life abundant. You see, what Jesus does here is he doesn't just say, I am going to take away your shame. Because he could have just walked up and gone, hey guys, I was the guy who was supposed to purchase wine. I didn't buy enough of it, so you guys feel like you should be embarrassed by these guys and you should bring them shame. But really, just bring it on me. Just shame me rather than them. But he goes one step further. You see, now instead of generations of kids walking down the street going, that family's the one that didn't have wine. That's the family that misrepresented God. That's the family that didn't do their justice under the chuppah, the glory of God. Now they're going to walk down the street and people are going to go, that's them. They're the ones. Hey, excuse me, come back. Where did you get that wine? They never told me where they got that wine. It was the best wine anyone has ever tasted. And you see what Jesus is doing? From the book of Joel, chapter 3, it says, when Messiah comes, the mountains will flood with wine, right? So, and that's the thing that's beautiful. Couldn't Jesus just have taken one of the water jars? It's 30 gallons. 30 gallons of wine. At a Middle Eastern wedding would have been just plenty. But what's Jesus saying? Jesus, the God of the universe, who's got cattle on 1,000 hills, like the Old Testament says, I didn't come just to take away your shame. I came to become your shame, to become your sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21. Jesus became the shame that he didn't know. He became the sin who knew no sin, that we could become his righteousness. He doesn't just take away my sin on the cross. He also replaces my shame and my sin with honor. He doesn't just take away my brokenness. He replaces it with his perfection. He doesn't just take away my unrighteousness. He gives me his righteousness. He puts it on me. And we see this whisper of the cross, that these people who would experience deep shame, instead Jesus gives them this most perfect, beautiful, delicious wine. And now they walk in the street and people go, how'd you do that? What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. Now, what you might be asking naturally is, well, if Jesus took all of their ceremonial washing jars and filled them with wine, then what's the solution to their need for cleanliness? And as this Jewish carpenter sits in the corner having performed his first miracle, he is the solution that they're looking for. Their question would be, well, then where is this living water? Where is this mayim chayim? Where is this ceremony? Where are we going to find the thing necessary in order to make ourselves clean? You took the old system and you replaced it with new wine. Water, stagnant water, all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament is significant in that it is about things that are passing, things that are broken, things that are old. The number 6 is things that are passing, things that are broken, things that are old. And what that gets replaced with is new wine. As Jesus says elsewhere in the Gospels, don't try to put me, Jesus says, my system, the gospel, into old things, into old wineskins, because it's going to blow up. Jesus says, I am the new wine that has come in. This also alludes to even his Last Supper, where Jesus says this, he takes the cup of the vine, he takes the wine after the meal, and he says, this is the new covenant in my blood. And I want you to regularly participate in this so you can remember who I am and whose you are in the middle of it. That I didn't just come to take away your shame, but I came to take away your shame and replace it with honor. And in order to replace our shame with honor, Jesus, Philippians 2, had to surrender his honor and become our shame. That's the beauty of the trade that took place on the cross. what we're going to find, if you keep reading in John chapter 4, Jesus meets with a Samaritan woman who, in such a very racist society back then, and this woman in the middle of the day who's had 5 different husbands, who was kind of an outcast socially, Jesus says, I will give you living water. Living water, the very same kind that they believed would have cleansed them, that was supposed to be in the stone jars. So what is Jesus saying? He's saying, your old system is broken, to which the question is, then how are we going to find cleanliness? How are we going to find remission? How are we going to find fix? How are we going to find salvation if you've taken away what makes us pure? He says, because I am now your living water. I am what makes you pure. And on the cross, as his side is pierced, it says that blood and water flow out of the side of Jesus. You see, the way that we are cleansed by the living water of Jesus is only through his piercing and brokenness and death on the cross. And if we lean in to this infinitely gracious God of love and kindness and replacement, what we're going to find is that when we surrender over our broken 6-jar life to him, and say, God, I don't understand exactly what you want to do in my life, but I do know one thing, that my old way of doing things, my old way of practicing sexuality, my old way of viewing myself, my old way of holding grudges, my old way of gossiping, my old way of living for myself, my old way of seeking my own identity has got me left feeling incomplete, broken, and in need of something new. Jesus says, well, Messiah has come. Are you willing to invite him to work in your heart, to work in your life? Or is he just the Jewish carpenter in the corner? Because we know that sometimes to invite Jesus to work, to take away the old things, there's going to be a process of incision that can hurt, and that can be painful, and that can make us a little bit uncomfortable. But what John promises us again and again is that as Jesus takes the things, our sacred cows that we hold on to. No, don't touch this. God, I'm at least doing kind of good in this area. Well, I'll give you anything, but not this relationship, but not this part of who I am. Jesus says, I'm not just going to give you a better version of that thing. I'm going to replace it with something eternal, long-lasting, myself. And I don't know where you are in the middle of this season, but I do know, like, the cultural narrative of a young adult in this generation is constantly, you're just bombarded with and plagued with and pegged with, and the world's insisting that you find your identity, that you seek it with all that you have. And I love what Jesus says right here. It was such a passive thing that they did. It was his mom. The bridegroom and the bride, I'm not sure they knew about it. But Jesus says, I'm going to work, and I'm going to give you an identity of honor. I'm going to give you an identity of renown, because I've taken on your identity of shame. Not because we are great or we are significant in and of ourselves, but because of whose we are in Christ. So if you're experiencing in your heart some kind of identity crisis, remember this. If you've been working hard to try to live up to this expectation you had for yourself about who you were going to be, you're trying to rid yourself of shame and trying to produce honor for yourself. I love this reminder that the only identity that's really meaningful in our life is one that we've received, not one that we've achieved. That's what God's telling us in this passage, right? He works behind the scenes. He replaces their shame with honor. Not because they worked really hard or tried. They just invited Jesus to take their old broken systems and to replace it with something new. And the faith that his mother had that said, look, I don't know what this would look like, but Jesus, I got a problem and I surrender it over to you. Make new wine out of this. Make new wine out of me. Make new wine out of this situation. He's not always going to come through with gallons and gallons of wine or temporary fixes on things. But I do know one thing, that when we find our resolution, when we find our identity in Jesus, we find a foundation by which we can navigate this world without all the neurotic behavior of trying to achieve, and work harder and create more and make your name more popular. And in the middle of all that stuff, we find a God who is the God of Sabbath rest that just says, the identity that's been won for you far supersedes anything this world has to offer. And that's the call of Jesus. to surrender the work of trying to become what you will never amount to, and instead surrender your life over to a God who takes your shame and replaces it with honor. Whatever that is in your life, I just hope you would pray this prayer along with me. Father, as we come to you, just like Mary did in faith, saying, like, I don't know what this looks like. I don't know. Are you going to make wine? Are you going to go buy more wine? Are you going to give the people money so they can go purchase more wine? I don't know what it is, but I do know one thing, that my system doesn't work. My way doesn't work. My old 6-stone water jars are just a placeholder. I'm trying to do community. I'm trying to do life. I'm trying to experience love. I'm trying to do these things, but I got to invite you into this process, the God of replacement and then abundance. In the same way you took my sin and turned it into something beautiful through your cross, would you take these things that I'm struggling with right now, and I don't know how you're going to work, but I just need you to work in them. I need you to take them. I need you to do what only you can do and replace my shame with your honor. Jesus, we love you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.